Welcome to Soapbox After Dark. I hope everyone is doing okay. I did this video once before and I hated the video, so I am going to do this video once again. And let's hope this one goes a little bit better. The video has to do with Venezuela. The New York Times comes out with a bombshell piece. At least the piece is a bombshell, but the piece shouldn't be a bombshell because Max Blumenthal reported on the piece almost a week or 2 weeks prior. Do you remember, this happened maybe last month or so, the United States put sanctions on Venezuela. The United States ratchets up those sanctions on Venezuela. These sanctions are so egregious that in cases of food and medicine, many of these cases, these things are not allowed into the country, or banks cancel the orders because the banks don't want to deal with the United States in this regard. The United States is economically strangulating this country with the hopes, with the goal of changing a government into a government that would allow it to get its hands on the resources of the country itself. This is open, this is obvious, and the United States has a history of doing exactly this going back for nearly 100 years. The media has been complicit in this. Not just complicit, the media has assisted in pushing the narrative of regime change. It makes the argument and carries the argument from the perspective of the U.S. government, as if Trump, Pompeo, a CIA guy, essentially the guy who was head of the CIA at one point, and the CIA had a history in mingling into the affairs of Latin America, Abrams, a convicted war criminal who tried to once before send weapons and arms through aid into various countries, and Bolton, a convicted war criminal, or not convicted war criminal, but he should be a convicted war criminal, but an outright war criminal. Abrams, also, in some cases, protecting dictators as they massacred the populations of Latin American countries. Also, while trying to get Congress to give him an appropriate more funds. This video that's being put out is from the State Department. The aid that went out in this case ends up getting torched. It's not allowed into the country. Maduro did allow some aid into the country. It allowed aid from countries that weren't trying to topple and overthrow their country, such as Russia. It did not allow the aid in from the United States because the United States was trying to overthrow Venezuela. It makes all the sense in the world that you wouldn't allow aid into a country from a country that is trying to overthrow your country or destabilize it to the point where the military splinters off and ends up with a civil war. I mean, ultimately, my point is, why on earth would you accept aid from a country that did not have your best interests at heart? And yet, this was a story that was pushed all around the world. This aid gets torched, and they scream at the height of their lungs that, oh my God, this horrible dictator that got elected multiple times, and just like the dictator before him gets elected multiple times, that is an authoritarian that doesn't allow media, even though they're media outlets that attack them relentlessly, is now destroying aid from the United States that is freedom and justice and apple pie. And because we're freedom and justice and apple pie, clearly there are no bad intentions from the aid that we're pushing for if he's burning the aid from the United States. People need that aid. They need to eat. They're not eating. They're crawling around on fours, eating each other. In Venezuela, it's a humanitarian crisis. We must do something about it. We got to get rid of Maduro. They carried that narrative. And what do you know? The New York Times comes out with a story. It didn't happen. Or it did happen, but it was the opposition that torched the materials. The wild part about this is, one story after the next came out that Maduro is such a cruel, horrible dictator that he danced the jig as food and supplies burned from people that essentially needed those supplies. I guess my point in this is, all of these media outlets carried the story. None of them challenged the story. All of them were wrong. It makes all the sense in the world to challenge this narrative that's put out by the Trump administration when the Trump administration wants to take down the government. Why are you buying the United States narrative on this? Again, are you incompetent? Are you in on it? Which one is it? It has to be one or the other. Because there is no way that you can know the U.S. history with Latin America, that you can look at the events that are taking place and not see the similarities between what they're doing versus what happened, and come away with the conclusion that it looks all good. Everything's great. There's no way. I'm sorry. That is a completely dishonest disposition, or again, a completely ignorant or incompetent position to take. Nevertheless, the New York Times comes out with a story saying it was bogus. Now, the New York Times doesn't take it to the next route of saying it's a false flag. I am taking it to that level because it makes all the sense in the world. All the incentives in the world are for them to do exactly what they did. The opposition is trying to push the government over. The opposition wants other forces to get involved in this because they want to be able to take power in Venezuela. And if it means being propped up by the United States and by its lapdog neighbors, then that's what they're willing to do. And so they're willing to put a freeze on what takes place in Venezuela. They're willing to set things on fire, set people on fire. And fact of the matter is, Max Blumenthal had reported on this prior. Listen to this. Max Blumenthal had already said in his article that this was a false flag. The trucks failed to reach the other side, but that was never really the point of the stunt. As Father Sergio Muñez, a right-wing Venezuelan activist posted on the Colombian side of the border, explained to the journalist Dan Cohen, the humanitarian aid was a purely symbolic provocation aimed at discrediting Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro in international eyes and generating waves of destabilizing violence. We were looking for a pretext in order to allow international forces to put additional pressure on Maduro in order to collapse the government of Venezuela. Max Blumenthal reported this, what day? February 24th, weeks ago. The New York Times has just come in on it. Right here. Vice President Mike Pence wrote that the tyrant of Caracas danced as his henchmen burned food and medicine. The State Department released a video saying Mr. Maduro ordered his trucks burned, and Venezuela's opposition held up in images of the burning aid, reproduced dozens of news sites, television screens throughout Latin America as evidence of Mr. Maduro's cruelty. But there's a problem. The opposition itself, not Mr. Maduro's men, appeared to have the cargo alight, but they had accidentally. All the incentives go for them to like this cargo, to do this in order to create a pretext. And the gentleman from Max Blumenthal's thing kind of made the point that the entire point of this was a stunt. But the New York Times still comes away with saying it was an accident. It was an accident. That's amazing. Not only do you cover for regime change narratives, you even, when the information is revealed, still take a position that makes no sense in the context of history. They weren't set on fire by accident. You have to be extraordinarily naive to believe that they set this cargo on fire accidentally. All of these operations, all of these media organizations from the standpoint of mainstream media are working in coordination to create the narrative and maintain a narrative that allows for a humanitarian quote-unquote intervention into Venezuela that just so happens to topple the government. It just so happens gives over resources to companies that have been aligned themselves with Bolton and Trump and Pompeo. Just saying. And by the way, pretending as if false flags don't exist. Weapons of mass destruction. I'm sorry. That did not take place. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The chemical attack in Syria. Again, when the United Nations sends their inspectors out there, it comes back and saying there was no chemical attack. The pretext that they were using to try to attack Syria did not exist. Gulf of Tonkin, again, did not exist. Turkey's President Erdogan was making this argument, got caught on tape talking about a false flag within Syria, always using this thing of Al-Qaeda, attacking Al-Qaeda, as a pretext to go after elements that they wanted to go after. False flags exist. The false flag of the Cuban issue, where the CIA was talking about bombing, if I'm not mistaken, a boat of Floridians or Cubans in order to create a pretext in order to go into Cuba. False flags exist. Media pretending as if they don't is somewhat problematic because when situations like this take place, they take this, it was purely an accident. It's purely an accident. You're bad at your job. That's what it boils down to. This was not an accident. This makes all the settings of a false flag. The United States has been working in coordination with elements in the government itself for years. They tried this once before with Chavez. It didn't work. The people threw themselves into the streets in order to make sure Chavez got back in power. And now they're trying it again, using, I guess you can say, the pretext of a financial crisis, with the United States putting its knee on its throat in order to try to collapse the government. Good job, Max Blumenthal, on this. Not so much New York Times. And yes, it's a bombshell, but it's Blumenthal's bombshell, not yours. I'll end it here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. And guys, I've said this on more than one occasion, but you guys help make the show. They often demonetize videos like this, dealing with anything with war or Venezuela or Israel or whatever. But I continue to do those videos because I think those videos are important to push back on the mainstream media's narrative that they push forth. I think it's bogus. And I want to tell you that it's bogus. You guys assist in that, whether it's through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, or Streamlabs, whatever the medium is. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. I really do. I will end this here, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks all.